Good morning and welcome to the Promised Land. I'm your host, Mark Shmueli, and today we're going to talk about the events of the week. It's just me today. Um, I want to start doing segments when needed, which is probably going to be weekly. I do have a full-time job as an immigration attorney, as you all know, and also I, I we do bring our guests every week, and so this is going to be a little different segment, and it's important because, as we know, we're after July 4th. These are the real dog days of summer. It's hot, people are going away, and this is the time when the government tends to do some things that are pretty nefarious and things that are this government, and people aren't paying as much attention, and already depleted offices are even more depleted right now. So, and this is a pretty important week, and I think it's a week that we can celebrate some victories. Celebrate some victories we'll do, because we need that. We need that. Remember, we can't live in the negativity. That doesn't mean the abuses, the attacks on due process, the attempt to bring our country into uh, an authoritarian realm, an attempt to scapegoat immigrants, an attempt to threaten the lives of immigrants. And really, 11 people have died in ICE custody this year. Mass incarceration under these conditions is psychologically and physically extremely damaging to people. It's cruel. We know that. Enough people are talking about that, and we're there. And you know what? We're bringing people are along, because essentially, when people have information, when people see images, they turn. They turn. And so the thing that I want to talk about is first thing I want to talk about is the Alcatraz. The alligator Alcatraz. And yes, that is the name. I didn't want to use the name. I didn't like the name, but that is the name. And it's something that we have to live with as an uh 55 to 23 Latinos, according to a YouGov poll, oppose it. So there's your overwhelming majority. Now remember, Trump did very well with Latinos, especially Latino men. And this is a very and we know that there are a lot of conservative Latinos that supported him, and there's a lot of others that did too. For the reason that, in my view, the Democrats have no real message, and they certainly had no real positive message on immigration. In fact, we've talked about that. They ran uh, towards the anti-immigrant position. They sidelined their most progressive, high-ranking senator on immigration, Alex Padilla, and when they were negotiating their bill last year, which failed anyway. So this is and their attacks on Democratic nominee Mamdani in New York fit that mold. So then we overall 48 to 33 oppose it, and the rest just don't know, because again, everything in the news is rolling at us, and this is all from really first impressions. This is really from first impressions, and trust me, most people are not getting immigrant rights news. Most people are just seeing the enthusiasm. They're seeing the just vile, non-empathetic. I mean, I have to say, when you look at people, and you're just your average person in the United States, and you look at people like Stephen Miller, like Tom Homan, like Christine Ohm, you imagine, would I be friends with them? Would they be in my life? And no, they wouldn't, because they're just their complete lack of empathy, and their complete cruelty, and also their absolute antipathy towards immigrants is very latent, and it's I mean, thankfully, I mean, we do have them out in the front because they are so bad in the media. They really are. And that's not just, me saying that, or, you know, even people to the right, people who are just liberals saying that. I think that's your general person. They just look at them and it's just no, no. And so that because that is pretty shocking, considering that the polling during the election season favored more detention, favored the positions that Trump said, Trump put out there on first glance. But then when you see the videos, it changes things quite a bit. So that's really powerful. And there were also massive protests on the road there. And I can tell you, Florida is not a state where a lot of people go out and, you don't see big protest rallies a lot in Florida, particularly lately. It's not that. And also, I know that area quite well. And so to be out there on the road protesting in the middle of July, beginning of July, this was the end of June when we first set it up, but still, Florida in the summer, I used to ride, war stories, right? I used to ride my bike to class about 6 miles at the University of Florida in summer, in the evening for class. And I had to have 2 shirts. One I wore and one I had in my backpack. And when I got out, before I could put the one I wore in my backpack, I had to wring it out because that's what Florida humidity is like in Central Florida. And really, this prison really is it's not in Central Florida, but it's not on the coast. There's no breeze. It's pretty awful. And so we've also gotten reports from inside, inmates reporting that, they're not given showers. They're not, the food has maggots in it. The temperature is extremely cold. And we see, when we've seen on before it opened, when they showed it off, actually, we see the beds all on top of each other, which, looks like one thing when you're doing a summer camp and you have activities all day away from your room, but not in a jail. And it looked more like CCOT in El Salvador than, I mean, not that prisons are good. And having taught years ago in a prison in Florida, not that prisons are good, but this is even worse than a regular prison. And remember, immigrants are not in detention for crimes. They are in detention, crimes meaning a criminal code. They're in detention for being charged with civil violation of immigration law. And that's what that is. Now, another good news item of the week is Adam Boyd. I think we're going to be introduced to Adam Boyd, and there's hopefully going to be many more Adam Boyds. Adam Boyd was not a hero. He was your 33-year-old attorney for ICE. So the way that works is you go to immigration court, and somebody like me represents an immigrant, and there's a judge, and ICE has a department, their lawyers will try the case for the Department of Homeland Security. And so they generally in the past, they've done their job, but through most administrations, they're accessible. They're there to do evaluate a case. And really, if the person has relief, meaning they can get a green card because their family would have hardship, they can get asylum, they can get a green card because somebody sponsored for them, and other things also. But it's normally a procedure that's civil. But this entire goal of this administration is to work hand in hand with the ICE goons in their ski masks in the hallway to have a seamless handoff, like a relay race. The lawyer does the lawyer does the work of dismissing a case if they need to from court, so that then they become vulnerable to be picked up by ICE. The lawyer does that, and the lawyer does that, or the lawyer will do whatever else they need to do without getting into detail to facilitate their detention and removal. They'll they'll argue, uh, that anybody who entered the United States in any way is mandatorily detained, and they'll get their support from the Justice Department. And so they're all kind of work, which is the Justice Department are the judges. So it became a situation that was untenable for Adam, and Adam quit. Adam quit. He said, I came in here to deport drug traffickers and people that had crimes, and I don't know what world he was living in, because while there are some of them there, certainly, if you sit in a court hearing for people that are detained, yes, some of them have these crimes that are that heinous. And but the majority of people are not, and the majority of people, if they have a lawyer, they can have a good case heard, and it can be not against the interest of the United States to let them stay. And as a general rule, it never has been. So Adam has quit because he said they were not trying cases under anything but quotas. Their only role as lawyers was to help to meet Stephen Miller's goal of 3,000 deportations a day, which is a really sick number. And this is so hopefully he will get his media. I'm sure he's available. So one action item for you all that are here is contact your local media, talk to your reporters, tell them that to interview people like Adam Boyd, to interview people in the communities, to interview people who are standing up. And yes, my hope is he becomes part of the resistance and becomes a very powerful voice. And hopefully we'll have him on here. So I'm going to do my best to contact him, and hopefully he'll be on very large news outlets, but that's that. And then we're going to visit our old friend, Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University student leader in the anti-genocide movement there, who the administration he was the first student they arrested. They arrested him, as you remember, with his wife, who was, again, then 9 months pregnant, and coming home from, I believe, an Eid meal, I believe. And so in the lobby of their housing, their graduate school housing, he was a graduate student at Columbia, and he was whisked off to Louisiana, where he was detained for months and released recently. And he still has his removal case going on, where they're trying to remove him under the provision. He has a green card, but they're trying to remove him under the provision that he is a foreign policy threat to the United States. So what's beautiful about his release is that he hasn't stopped his actions calling for an end to genocide, an end to human rights abuses, and really, again, worked in the best tradition of what the United States purports to be, and is really a benefit to his classmates, to the country at large. Well, he sued last night. Again, when does our news happen? We found out last night that he sued the Trump administration for $20 million for wrongful imprisonment, for the defamation, for his for labeling him as an anti-Semite. And the reason that he did that lawsuit is because these labels, the way they've talked about him, has certainly placed him, his wife, and their child in danger. No question. And it caused him to miss birth of his child, the psychological damage of that while he was detained. It caused him to be, you know, placed, in detention for many months for no reason. And it caused distress to his family, obviously. And, he's also said in lieu of a settlement of that, he would accept an official apology and a revisiting a change in these procedures of arresting and detaining people. And so I don't know what that second part means, but certainly the first part, a formal apology, we know that there's about as much chance of that as there's a chance of Kim Jong-un being on stage in Madison Square Garden tonight reading poetry. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. If they didn't do it with we saw the way that they've doubled down on Abrego, on Kilmer Abrego Garcia. They are not going to apologize for somebody who stands up for Palestinian rights and demands an apology for being labeled an anti-Semite. He knows that, but it's also, beyond anything else, he is completely right. And he's also very, very good at what he does. And, if he's going to get deported on this, he's going to go out with a bang, which is excellent. So let me just give you a quote from Maxwell Frost regarding Alligator Alcatraz. His view. Maxwell Frost is, I think, the youngest member of Congress. He's from Orlando. He was elected in the last cycle, and he talked about the conditions there, how people are forced to use like one room, to defecate, to eat, to etc. The conditions, and he said it's nothing short of a human rights abuse. And further, he said, this is him. This isn't some immigrant rights activist on the ground. This is a member of Congress and pretty much a moderate Democrat. This isn't, somebody who you would, put into a squad or anything like that. Pretty much a moderate Democrat. He said, anyone who supports this is a disgusting excuse for a human being, let alone a public servant. And I think that is, honestly, I think that's a very common thought. This is a pretty mainstream Democrat. And you know what, Democrats, you could say that. Imagine Chuck Schumer saying that. He'd have to actually feel the ability to let this resonate. And that's the point. When you are a member of Congress and you are him, you're Maxwell Frost, and you're 27 or something like that years old. And so you don't, you haven't had so many years of politics and maneuvering to make everything you do so cautious that you don't have a sense of yourself anymore. And just his sense that's a raw emotion. And that's a raw emotion from somebody who's in a party not in power. But we know it's also somebody who, by saying that, when he gets in power, he's not going to be able to tolerate these policies. He's not going to be able to normalize them. And that's the point, is that this can't be normalized. So kudos to him. Kudos to Adam Boyd. Always kudos to Mahmoud Khalil. Always. So now I just want to talk about one thing that struck me this week. I was listening to another podcast with a Medicaid expert on, and I want to talk about, the big, bad, beautiful bill. This is what it's called, and this is what we are. I think that was the official name, or maybe Schumer got it out of being the official name, but it doesn't matter. Like Obamacare, people are going to use that, whatever. There's a part of it on Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is something that the federal government provides, I think 90% of the funding to each state, to states. And so they pretty much fund it in states. But states can make their own rules of who's eligible, which is interesting. And there are some limits, but pretty much as I understand it, states can make their own rules. And there's a couple of states that allow for Medicaid to include everybody in certain circumstances, emergency rooms, etc. And so what the bill does is not until 2027, but it October 1st, 2027, will it will lower the federal the federal contribution to the states from by 10% to 80%. And these two states which provide any benefits to out of status individuals. And so what this does, and Medicaid again is emergency medical care for people who are not insured. It's if somebody shows up in an emergency room, if somebody they will cover it. And so by doing that, they're pitting US citizens against immigrants, essentially. And so for the same amount of money. And they're doing that because when you lower the total contribution, you lower the services the state's able to do provide overall. And so you have states in which that are doing that, but you're going to see the benefits cut for everybody. So the point is going to be, if you don't want your Medicaid benefits cut, you have to support cutting them from people who are not in status. And so again, it creates this war. And this is something that I actually wrote about in the 2013 bill, where there was a farm worker provision that did not allow people who were not documented to unionize or collectively bargain. And so that pitted, so that meant that they were vulnerable to having a lower wage, vulnerable to worse working conditions, and more favorable to the greed of the farm worker, of the farm ownership, and so it pitted. If you're a U.S. citizen or a legal worker in the U.S., you're not going to support that bill because it creates a vulnerability for you. It puts you in a different position. These are the kind of things that that take people who are working class people, or farm workers certainly are not are the hardest workers with some of the lowest pay, from organizing on labor, on worker rights, on health, so they don't have pesticides sprayed on them. There's so many issues with farm workers that education. I know I've worked with farm workers in the past, and I know there's so many issues that tie to that, and it also and so this is their attempt again to hit the root of immigration as a gateway to dividing people on other issues that are favorable to change, and to getting the 1% a whole lot less power, and also to real organizing. So and we're going to talk about this. When things cool down a little bit and there's not everything hot that I think we have to talk about in the moment, maybe come August, we're going to go through and we're going to talk about the history of this, not only scapegoating, but the history of the foundational building blocks that people set up since the beginning of mass immigration, of really since the beginning of the U.S. with the Alien and Sedition Acts they're used now, but then with the massive Irish immigrants, and this preservation of white supremacy, this preservation of and so the immigration of the late 1880s, this was fixed, and there was a very hidden, not really much talked about congressional attempt from the beginning to stop that, and to create, because of the danger that they saw of what the United States would become racially. So after the Civil War, also workers were pitted against each other, white and black workers, and so you had many white folks all through the country, in the South primarily, um, look at themselves as in competition with former slaves. And so therefore, they were prone in their own interests to support the placing, former slaves at a disadvantage in voting, in labor rights, in housing. And so that they could have, this is a classic maneuver of the powerful, is to divide and then conquer, and which they did, because services for working class white Southerners weren't getting any better. Their power structure was cemented, but they had a feeling of belonging, for one, and they also had an economic advantage that was, slightly higher and a little bit more stake in power. So this, that is tied to today with people who are Medicaid recipients. So instead of organizing for better conditions and all of that, they have to, they're pitted against each other, as we talked about. And again, we're also going to talk about the Japanese internment and the horrors of that, of, marginalizing people who, in that case, at a higher rate than uh white communities had their kids in the army, so we're going to talk about these things. You know, it's it's all part of the same plan. It's accelerated right now. It's blunt, and it's actually uh pretty unpopular, as we can see when it's out there and we talk about it. The Medicaid provision, to be honest, there's so much else that in that bill that's bad. There's, the money we saw for detention. There's these radically increased fees for immigration benefits, which are forced, not only force people to pay higher fees, but also force people to pay continually and in a very unorthodox way. And so it's really difficult to understand. It's already a Byzantine system, and this creates more chaos within it. So, but folks, get out there in your communities. I was talking to the people in a market predominantly in the Latino neighborhoods near me in Maryland, and you know they asked me, like, what's the safety plan for workers? What's the safety plan for people shopping there? And this is a market that's a nonprofit served to support in the community to bring healthy foods in. And so these are places that should be just like should be good for the community. And they're they're being you know surveilled possibly, and fear is in the air. Go down and support those communities. Go to the immigration courts and stand there. You know, put your body out there. Know that those of us who have status, those of us who were born here, those of us who are, I mean, if you're born here, absolutely. If you are a naturalized citizen, think about it somewhat, but also, you know, pick your level of privilege and pick your level of ability, and you can always do something. You can always do something. And I want to also touch on the fact that Head Start is also not is checking immigration status, which again means that for the first time, people who are not in proper status, kids under young kids, are not permitted to use the system. Um, how that's going to work, we'll see. But it's also, again, a marginalization, because when you go after children and children's health, you really, really are a white supremacist. And that's what that is. It's eliminating people. And yes, there are people of color and immigrants that are citizens. We know that. And most kids of that age, people, especially in the last few years, when, people are, kids are born here. It's not 100% a white supremacist, but it is an erasure of new immigrants and their kids. And, you know, you think about a mom bringing, or dad bringing their kids across the border, and then you think that that kid is going to get more than, you know, marginalized and punished early on. And so they, you know, schools have generally been off limit. And we talked, you know, actually we didn't talk about it, but I wrote a Substack piece. You can look under my name on Substack, and you'll see a piece about Oklahoma, of all places, rejecting their school system, rejecting to a move to have the status of kids, immigration status, checked in school. And that was rejected by the very conservative governor of Oklahoma because, you know, schools, kids are kids, and attacking kids is really a special form of cruelty. So, you know, I think I'm really confident. You know, I'm talking about, I'm not going to ever sugarcoat things. If you tell me I am, if you tell me that, you know, things are, believe me, I know how bad it is, but I also know that we all have a place, and we all have a place to make a difference. And it's working. It's working. Look at the alligator Alcatraz poll. Look at talk to your neighbors. I'm hearing it from people who aren't that political. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. So on that, you know, we're gonna have some great guests in the next few weeks. And one of the things that we're gonna look forward to is I'm gonna take this on the road, and we're gonna do an episode from Springfield, Ohio, the made famous in the last election in when the president in his debate with Kamala Harris used some of the finer debating Oxford level debating skills to discuss uh, the food choices of immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. And but we're gonna, in all honesty, we're gonna go, and I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna go there, and I'm gonna learn things, and I'm gonna talk to people. And the hope is that we're gonna do a show from there in the next few weeks. So, but we'll have some, we'll have shows in between. And in the meantime, you know, keep up the hope, keep fighting, and until next time, thank you. And I also want to thank, as always, Insect Factory, Jeff Barsky for the intro and outro music, and Stephanie Buatois for her superb production.